All right, the purpose of this lecture is just to give you a quick overview of how to use a microscope. Even though this is an online class, we do need to go through the ins and outs of using a microscope, and you will do a lab activity on how to use a microscope. So even though you're not physically doing it, you should know the parts of the microscope and also how to use a microscope. So this is a sketch of the microscopes that we have at DVC. So this is a classic light microscope. So I want to run through the anatomy of the microscope really quick. So starting at the top where you would look through these lenses right here, these are called the ocular lenses. They have a magnification of 10 times. So just by looking through these ocular lenses, you're going to get a magnification of 10. So things are going to increase by 10 times. Then we have this observation tube area, sometimes referred to as the neck. And then we have the base down here. So those are the big parts. Now the other lenses that you see right here are called objective lenses. And most of our microscopes are going to have 4. And we'll run through those different objective lenses. But the lowest power one is actually called the scanning lens. And then the next higher power one is called the low power lens. And then the high power lens. And the highest power that we have is called the oil immersion lens. And that lens can only be used with immersion oil that you put on the microscope slide. So other parts of the microscope that you can see here, this is the stage where you'd actually put the slide that you're looking at. And there's a little spring contraption right here that will lock the microscope slide in place so you can move it around as you wish. If you want to move the microscope slide around to center what you're looking at or look at a different part of the slide, you use these 2 knobs right here. So the XY adjustment knobs. One of these moves the stage right to left, and the other one moves it front to back. So that way, when you get comfortable using the knobs, you can maneuver the slide however you want. Other things going through the anatomy, the focusing knobs are really important. So there's 2 focus adjustment knobs. So we have a coarse adjustment knob, which is this big one. And that's going to move the stage up and down to change the focus. And it changes it drastically. So you can actually see the stage moving significantly when you use this coarse adjustment knob. Then there's this smaller knob right here called the fine adjustment knob. And that causes very small changes in the stage. It causes it to move very little. And it does change the focus, but just a tiny bit. So generally what you do is get it into focus with the coarse adjustment knob and then use the fine adjustment knob to fine tune the focus. So the slide would go here. This is where the light is coming from. The light is projecting upward. And then we have this thing here called the condenser, which concentrates the light beam on the specimen. And then we can also adjust what's called the aperture iris diaphragm knob. And this little lever goes back and forth. This can help with contrast and sometimes resolution. We'll talk about those terms in a moment. Other key features of the microscope that are worth noting, we have the light intensity knob, which is often called the rheostat. So rheostat. And that controls basically how bright this light is. So all the way up would be really bright, all the way down would be basically off. And then we have the on-off switch, which turns the microscope on and off. So if you were to actually go to the cabinet and take out a microscope, these are some things that you should do. You always carry it with 2 hands. So there's a little place to put your fingers in the back of the neck of the microscope, and then the other hand goes under the base. And then you want to check before you use it, you want to make sure whoever used it before you that put it away correctly. So the cord we want wrapped around the base. The rheostat should be all the way down at a setting of either 1 or 0, whatever the lowest setting is on the microscope. As far as the objective lens that's in place, the scanning lens should always be in place when the microscope's put away. The stage should be centered, meaning it's not sticking out to the front or the back. It's just like it's flush. And then the on-off switch, obviously it should be off. And then if you were going to use a microscope, before you put it away, you want to make sure you do all those things. So you would take the slide off, whichever slide you were looking at, turn it off, put the rheostat at the lowest setting, make sure the scanning objective lens is in place, lower the stage and center it. and then wrap the cord lightly around the base, and then put it in the correct cabinet. So all those things that you would do before you put your microscope away for the day. All right, so some tips for viewing through a microscope. Always start looking at something with the scanning lens in place. When the scanning objective lens is in place, you can use the coarse adjustment knob, and that causes the big changes in the stage. And once you move to a higher power lens, so after you get it in focus with the scanning lens, you'd move to the low power lens if you wanted to zoom in some more. Once you're in any other lens other than the scanning, you should no longer use the coarse adjustment knob. So you would only use the fine focus knob when you're either in the low power lens, the high power lens, or the oil immersion. So use only the fine focus knob with those objective lenses. Our microscopes are parfocal, meaning that an object stays in approximate focus when switching between objective lenses. Thus, you only need the fine focus. So most of the microscopes are going to have a pointer, which looks like this. So oftentimes when you look through the microscope, you see a line like this, and some students in the past have thought that it was a problem. But this is a pointer. It's there for a reason. So you could put the pointer on whatever you're looking at and show it to somebody else and say, this is what I'm trying to show you. So it's kind of like a landmark. Some terms that are important in viewing: contrast means the difference in brightness between the object that you're looking at and the background. So you want good contrast so you can see what you're looking at. If you have poor contrast, everything kind of blends in together. So you can adjust this by the iris diaphragm lever or the rheostat. Generally speaking, the more open the iris is, the lower the contrast. More closed, you get greater contrast. Resolution is another term that is important in microscope viewing, and that refers to the ability to clearly determine two separate objects and separate them from one another. So if you have good resolutions, like in this picture here, you can clearly see that these are two separate objects. If you had poor resolution, they would blend in together. And then we said that condenser on the microscope concentrates the light on the specimen, and that is obviously you can control the brightness of that too with the rheostat. But the condenser is an important part of the microscope because it's focusing that light on the specimen. And then if you're moving from a low power to a high power lens, make sure whatever you're looking at, you put it in the center, because if you don't put it in the center, it may not be visible at the next magnification, because the field that you're looking at, and during the first lab, you'll learn something to the diameter of the field, which is basically how big that your view is. If you go to a higher power lens, that's going to decrease. So your diameter of the field actually decreases as you move to a higher power lens. So if you don't center what you're looking at and you move to a higher power lens, it may just not be in the field of view anymore. So if you other things, if you move the slide and the object doesn't move, you're probably not looking at the slide. You just may be way out of focus, which is common. Or the lens could be really dirty. But in more times than not, if you move the slide and nothing moves, like you move it right to left and nothing moves in what you're looking at, that basically means you're way out of focus. And then another important point: if you're going to use the oil immersion lens, you have to use immersion oil with it, and you just put a drop on the microscope slide, and then the oil immersion objective lens touches it, and it gives you a clear view. You are not supposed to use the oil immersion lens without oil, and similarly, you're not supposed to use oil with any of the other objective lenses.